So welcome, everybody. My name is Serah Rono. I am currently the Director of Community at the Carpentries, and I'll tell you a little the Carpentries is in a little bit. My background is in computer science. I am a computer scientist by training, and over the last 7 years, I have worked in different open source projects as a backend developer and a front-end developer. And somewhere along the way, I found myself involved in community organizing and community wrangling. And so that's what I've primarily done as a developer advocate and developer for several years before I joined the Carpentries. I worked with Code for Africa in Nairobi for a couple of years, and then Open Knowledge Foundation, which is based in the UK, for a couple of years, and then joined the Carpentries last year in January. Yes, and so I interface with communities in technical spaces quite a bit. You can find me on email, serahcarpentries.org. You can also find me on Twitter, Serah Rono, and I'm happy to engage with you in whatever way I can on whatever platform you find me. So today I will be sharing some of the lessons that I've picked up in the pursuit of community sustainability over the years, and particularly in open source settings where people come with a need, which is to solve a technical problem. So they come for the code, and then if there's a great community around it, they probably stay and contribute and continue to use the tool and things like that. Okay, so a little bit about the Carpentries. On your extreme left, you will see a sort of timeline that sort of stops right before 2019. So the Carpentries started a long time ago. And when it started, it was, Software Carpentry was the primary project that started in 1998. Set up by Greg Wilson and friends. And then, so what they wanted to do at that time was Greg Wilson realized he was teaching computer science, but then a lot of these skills were really, well, the resources that existed weren't very easy for people who are from non-tech backgrounds to, you know, take them on and use them in their work. But he wanted to change that. So he set up Software Carpentry. And then a little after 2014, Data Carpentry was set up by Tracy Teal and friends to cater to a slightly different audience than Greg Wilson's. And then Library Carpentry was then formed. But where our story starts as the Carpentries is early 2018, when Software Carpentry, Data Carpentry, and Library Carpentry became one big thing, and they named themselves the Carpentries. And so what the Carpentries is, it's a nonprofit that brings together technologists and researchers and scientists and information librarians for the purpose of imparting foundational coding and data science skills, primarily to researchers and information librarians around the world. So we develop lessons, primarily in R and Python. They're all open source. They're on our GitHub page, and we'll talk a bit about that. They're on our GitHub organization, and anyone can access them and use them. But to encourage people to come into workshops where they learn with other people and are taught by instructors from the Carpentries. So we have member organizations in the Carpentries who then, once they become members, it means that the Carpentries can support them to run these Python and R workshops in the institutions. And so we have 85 member organizations. We've had 85 to date. And in that time, we've been able to reach over 68,000 learners. So people who've turned up in these workshops and learned and had these foundational skills imparted on them. And we have over 2,700 instructors to thank for all the 2,700 plus workshops that have been run to date. And we've at least run a workshop in each of the continents, and we've been to 61 countries to date. So that's a brief overview. It's a lot of numbers, but I hope it gives you an idea of what the Carpentries is and what we do and where we've come from over the years. And then this map tells a better story, and I really love it because it shows the places where we've done a great job to date and places where we really need to do more. So I will explain this map. So the countries that are shaded in purple, dark blue, and dark green, those are countries where we've run between one workshop and 100 workshops. So purple is maybe between 1 and 10 workshops, and then dark blue is maybe between 15 and 80, and then green is somewhere between 80 and 200. And then the places you see shaded in a lighter green, so places like Canada and Australia, those are places where we've run between 200 and 400 workshops to date, and New Zealand as well. And then yellow are the countries where, well, it's mostly the states where we've been able to run over 500 workshops to date. And then the sad story is that the countries shaded in gray are places where we haven't been able to run any workshop at all. So there are researchers and information librarians in these countries that could benefit from the resources and the lessons, the open lessons that the Carpentries has. But because of different constraints, we really haven't been able to run workshops there yet. Yes, and then this is the team, the Carpentries core team as it looks right now. There's 13 of us, soon to be 14. There's one more community member joining the core team. And what this team does is, because the Carpentries is a community-led organization, and all these beautiful numbers that you see are primarily the effort of a community rather than the core team. What this team does is they build infrastructure, they set up frameworks, they fundraise in a way that helps to support different initiatives that community members run in the Carpentries. There are really wonderful lots. So today we are going to talk about incentives, recognition, and retention, and different strategies around incentives and retention and recognition that help to sustain a community, and primarily one that is global and online first, like the Carpentries is. So as we start to do that, I'd love to hear from you in chat. If you can take 30 seconds to share, think about any community that you're actively involved in, or that you really look up to and admire even from afar. What are the kinds of things in that community that motivate or encourage people to keep coming back and doing the things that they do in that community? You can just type out in chat, and it doesn't have to be, it can be as short as you want it to be, it can be as long as you want it to be. Oh, that's really great, David. Great to see that you teach workshops in Saudi Arabia, KAUSD. Thanks for sharing. So anyone want to share the incentives that they've seen in different communities? As I wait on you, I can advance to the next slide. I will read chat as I see things come up. So in the Carpentries, the things that have incentivized our community to come back time and again, some of the ones that we've observed have been that we have a shared goal, and that means that there's a clear understanding that the mission and what brings people together in our community is to teach foundational coding and data science skills to researchers and librarians worldwide. So people who are willing to be involved in this work can plug in at any point, and this brings people together quite a bit. And then we also have an elaborate code of conduct, which sort of establishes the expected behaviors in our community. And on the right side, I took a screenshot of the too long didn't read version of it. We encourage people to show courtesy and respect to each other, to use welcoming and inclusive language, to be respectful of different viewpoints and experiences, and also to gracefully accept constructive criticism, which is difficult. So this code of conduct governs the online and in-person spaces where the Carpentries meets, and it's shared at the beginning of every meeting. So people have a place to go to in case they need to check if something that happened was out of line, or to find out how to report things and things like that. In chat, Kojo says, I'm part of the Django and Python communities in the US. We put a lot of emphasis on making the community as inclusive as possible. At KAUST in Saudi Arabia, we have started offering completion certificates for our workshops. That's really great. People have something to show. And also we send post-workshop feedback from which is required to be returned in order to get credit for attending. So that's David. And then Nikhil says, in some of the communities I'm a part of, we try to do pair programming sessions so that the senior and more experienced folks can help the ones getting started. I really love this. It's a form of mentoring, and it's exceptional. I love it. Muhewe, I hope I said your name right, says it is part of our Python communities here in Namibia. One of our community in it is an instructor. I guess you mean the Carpentries is a member. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. And then other than the shared goal, the elaborate code of conduct, all the resources that are developed in the Carpentries are licensed under the CC BY license. They're available for everyone to access, to audit on GitHub, to suggest changes for, to ask questions about. We also, use, apart from using GitHub issues to audit these things, we have regular community discussions where people can come and talk about a specific lesson or general topics and decide how to improve resources in the Carpentries to cater to different contexts as we go along. And then we also have community-led governance and initiatives. So for example, we have an executive council that runs all things that are governance related in the Carpentries, and all of them are community members. Some are elected and some are appointed by previous executive councils. And then we currently are running a 7-week conference called CarpentryCon. It started in mid-July, it's going through to the end of August, and it was organized solely by community members. It's 7 weeks long because it's a global community. Time zones are going to be hectic. So we decided to do sessions, a couple of sessions a week at different times across the board. You can check the website schedule to see how we spread them across the board, but it's been really good so far. And it's allowed me to be able to come to PyCon in the middle of CarpentryCon too, so that's great. And then there's lots of opportunities for professional development for our community members. We want them to come in as one thing, and yes, they will gain from the lessons that they go through and the computational skills that they gain, but also for them to find ways to grow over time in the community. So like someone else said, peer mentorship is something that's really important to us, and we have a mentoring program. We also entrust lessons that are used in the Carpentries to community members. So charge of maintaining the repositories around these lessons, and that means any issues that are raised, they will be leaders. They will make decisions around how to tackle the different issues, how to change aspects of the lessons and in a way that benefits the community, things like that. And then we also have a collaboration-driven ethos, and we use consensus-driven progression to make decisions, many decisions in the community. And if you check the conversations repo in the Carpentries, go to the issues section, you will see the discussions that happen around different things that we need to make decisions on. And on the right, I've taken screenshots of, people talking about mentoring groups and showcasing the work they've done with their mentors at the end of a mentoring period. And, lessons from being a maintainer and how it's helped people grow and things like that. All of this are on the Carpentries blog. And then it's one big community, but there's many ways for people to be engaged. One of the core values that the Carpentries has is that we value all contributions, and we're really keen on that. And so if you only have an hour and you're able to host a session, that's a great way to contribute. And we value that equally, to the person who's doing maintenance, because, maybe the institution is supporting part of their time for Carpentries work, or if you're able to review some of the lessons or give feedback once you've gone through them, or if you're able to, ask questions in Slack or respond to other people's questions or brainstorm with other people, all of that matters to us. And there's many different sub-communities. What I mean by this is, so the Carpentries is one big organization doing a lot of different things. So you can join the maintainer sub-community, or you can sign up to run workshops, in which case you'd be an instructor, or you can sign up to mentor instructors or to train those instructors. So there's many different ways to be involved. There's also committees and task forces that do specific things like organize CarpentryCon 2020 or oversee the code of conduct and things like that. And then allowing people different ways to plug in around the same project. So for example, if we put out a request for comments, most times we recognize that some people might not be comfortable to share things like on GitHub with their name attached to it, or in the mailing list with their email attached to it. So we can sometimes put out two versions of the same thing. So you will decide if you wanted to use, forms to give us feedback, or use the public GitHub issue, for example, for feedback. Or in a call like this. So you know how Zoom works, everyone is able to mute and unmute themselves to contribute. We recognize that not everyone is in a position to do that. So we always have a collaborative notes document going on, like to accompany the calls we have. And that means even if I'm muted and with my video off and they have contributions, I can type them in anonymously. We use something called Etherpad that allows you to type in anonymously, or to, label your contributions by naming yourself in the doc. And then, people can go into discussions and take time to think about what they've heard and learned. And if they want to share by way of writing rather than by hosting a discussion, they're welcome to do that. So multiple ways to be involved so that everyone is included in a way that makes sense to them. So that's incentives. And then I want to talk briefly about the kinds of recognition strategies that we've tried at the Carpentries. And later on, I'll also share the challenges we're facing around all these strategies. So recognition, to draw a bit of a distinction from incentives, is, the acknowledgement of how important the quality of work that someone has done is, and taking the time to express gratitude or show appreciation for it. Thank you, Joseph, for sharing the Carpentries website in chat. I appreciate that. So let's talk a bit about the recognitions we've tried. And I will start with one that we did and learned that wasn't the best way to do. And I'll explain why. So we wanted to recognize the efforts that our community members were putting in. And in a community that has, give or take, about 2,000 active participants in Slack at least, and several hundred in different places at any given point, We set up community awards, and after 2018, we had to stop running our community awards. And it wasn't because they weren't a good way to recognize the work of people, but in an open community, in an where everyone is contributing of their time in different ways as they're able to. The people who were awarded felt that, you know, they were given recognition for work that a whole community did. And so it put them on the spot. It felt like, you know, it brought friction to some of the relationships that people had in our community, but also it gave preeminence to, I don't know how to say this, but yeah, we sort of in the end said to people inadvertently that the visible work you do is valued more. And so what happens to the person who's shown up to community calls all year or several times and taken notes that have helped people who aren't in the call to follow through with the notes and still be at par with what is happening in the community? What happens to the invisible work that people are doing in the community? So this wasn't a really good way to run community recognition. And so we decided to stop it after hearing from the awardees at the end of 2018. And so what did we do instead? In 2019, we decided there's a lot that goes on in the community that the 10 of us in the core team at the time, now 13, soon to be 14, had no idea about, right? Because we weren't in every call that was happening. We weren't in every repository where discussions were happening. We weren't privy to everything. So we reached out to different community members in the different sub-communities that they're in, and we told them, so you're a maintainer, or you are a regional coordinator, or you've been to the Code of Conduct Committee, you know, or you've been an instructor in a workshop and you've worked with others. Do you mind telling us some of the things that have stood out for you in your work with Serah, in your work with Joseph, in your work with David in the last year? And so people wrote lots and lots of content. So we gave people 3 or 4 questions in a Google Doc, and then people went away and wrote about all the different ways they collaborated and what that meant to them. And so we published that in a series of, I think it's 20 or 19 blog posts in December of last year. And it's community members saying thank you to each other for very specific things, sometimes with links, sometimes with photos. And it's just a really beautiful thing that came out of this and out of a really intense lesson that we picked up from running the awards the year before. And so this is something we'll continue to do. And we have a hashtag on Twitter, which is green stickies. So in the Carpentries, we use green and red stickies to communicate in a workshop setting. So, you know, the sticky notes that you have, they're really small and squarish, and they come in different colors. And so the green sticky is used to communicate to an instructor that as a person learning, I have no questions. I am at par with what you're sharing at the front of a class. And so I will stick it to the front of my screen where they can see it from the front of the classroom. And then as if I have a question, I will put a red sticky on my laptop where they can see it, and someone will come around to help me without disrupting the session. So yeah, green stickies are the things we are grateful for in the real world too. And so that became a thing that we will carry on with us. And it was a really good exercise we had from our community. And then to continually thank people, to not wait for December of every year so that people say thank you, but as often as we can to recognize the work that people are doing. So that means, you know, that instead of Serah, who's director of community, standing every time to speak for the work that people are doing in the community, it's passing on the microphone to them actively. And so that's what we're trying to do with things like Carpentry Con at home. But even when Carpentry Con isn't happening, it's me facilitating the setting up of, a community discussion where a community member can come and speak about the ideas they've had, and then facilitate a session where others also share their own ideas and brings about collaboration. So passing on the mic rather than, speaking for people or on behalf of people all the time. Encouraging people to write and giving them a platform to publish their ideas, their experiences. So we do that on the blog and things like that. And also mentioning contributors by name at every opportunity. My former boss, her name is Tracy Till, had a really lovely slide last year, and I just couldn't get it in time for the session. But she had the names of as many instructors as there are in the Carpentries on one slide. You really couldn't find, like, you couldn't read. It wasn't legible for the people viewing the slide. But what that did is, for an instructor, I can go and find my name and say, hey, I'm there. And it looked really cool. Anyway, so there's better ways to do that. And we try to do that. We have carpentries.org/instructors, carpentries.org/trainers, trying different ideas for how to recognize people better in our community. And I welcome your ideas in chat too. What are some of the ways you can recognize people more openly in communities? Okay, and then the last thing I want to mention before we move on to challenges, which is where I'd like to spend a bit of time. What are some of the strategies to retain community members as they grow? So retention is the ability to keep people interested and willing to engage and contribute to community activities. So that means as a community is growing, you don't want to lose out on the people that were there before. You want to keep them and also keep newcomers interested and working together. So what are some of the strategies around that? So one of them is the governance structure. So I mentioned that our community members constitute the executive council, which makes governance decisions in the Carpentries. And every so often, they will rotate in and out of roles. So that makes sure everyone who is interested in leadership and in understanding leadership better, and especially in a nonprofit setting, is able to apply and be voted in by community members or nominated by a former executive council to serve on at a governance level. And then they work closely with other community members to prioritize community needs based on the funding we've received and the resources we have at hand. And then our community members genuinely do all of the heavy lifting. So I think because they come in and build relationships and really strive to keep them going, and those relationships develop into collaborations. Sometimes they become formal partnerships. Sometimes people say, hey, it looks like you are from this domain of expertise, which I'm also from, and it looks like the Carpentries doesn't have lessons that cater to a domain. How about we develop a lesson in Python to introduce Python or R to community members in our specific context? And that becomes a way that they collaborate. And they continue to share and do the really hard work, which is to talk about the difficult issues and to find ways to solve them together. And then some of the things we've had to do is think about how we communicate in an online setting, because that's 90 or that's a huge percentage of how, how a community grows and how they come together at any given time. So under the conversations repo, the second link, github.com Carpentries conversations, the first issue, and it's still pinned on that profile, is one around communication. So time and time again, we go back to people and ask them, so this is how we've been communicating, and these are the platforms we've employed to make it possible to meet and talk. Which ones are great for you and which ones aren't working and why? You can see the most recent work that we did from mid last year in that blog post. If you search boats, bridges, balloons, there's an elaborate blog post about how we communicate. And the work isn't done. If we go to a new community and realize that, you know, some of the resources we use are not available to people in that country, we need to go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and try to involve them as well. Yeah, so like right now, if you check the conversations repository, you'll see there's a question that I put out just yesterday, because we realized there are tools and platforms that have for long been inaccessible to community members in some places. We don't know the full extent of them. So we're asking people to tell us what tools are blocked in the country that you are or unavailable. And then we hope to use that information to start to think about how else can we organize so that people are still able to collaborate without necessarily fragmenting the community further, but achieving, you know, our mission, which is to teach foundational computational skills and data science skills to as many researchers and librarians as we can get to. And then collective ownership, like I said before, everything is licensed for free use and reuse. So CC BY applies, and that's for the lessons themselves and all other associated resources, guides and workflows, the events that we run. So we'll put out how we did this, and in a way that other people can borrow and use resources. There'll be, you know, spreadsheets we used and frameworks we used for meetings and things like that, that people can borrow and use. And then continuing to expand opportunities for people to be involved. So there's three things I want to mention, and these things make me really happy. So we realized there's lots of domains that we haven't gotten to yet and that there are no lessons for. So think about this, and I'll mention journalists because I've been in a situation at Code for Africa where we had to impart data skills on journalists so they could do data-driven journalism better. So think about a journalist who wants to learn Python or R and doesn't know where to get started. So if another journalist had more experience, they could come and say, hey, what about we develop a lesson that's primarily for journalists? So there's a new space in the Carpentries called Carpentries Incubator, which is where they can use the Carpentries resources to develop the lessons and take as much time as they need to discuss and brainstorm and write the material itself. And once they're ready to test it, they then send it to Carpentries labs, which then means that it's being, the lesson is now being taught in different workshops, and feedback is being given to improve the lesson in different ways. And at some point, it is reviewed, and if it is ready, then it becomes a formal lesson of the Carpentries, which means it can be taught by any instructor in any setting around the world. Yeah, so I really love that, because it takes the process away from our hands as the core team, so we're not a bottleneck in the development of lessons that our community would like to see. Yeah, and then scoping the work of sub-communities, committees, and task forces so that they don't feel overwhelmed, and especially weaving in start dates and end dates to the work. And that helps in the sense that people will often get burnt out, and especially because they have day jobs, and the Carpentries is something that people plug into because they enjoy being in this community. How do you make sure that people still are able to strike a balance, and that them saying no doesn't make them feel like they're bad people? So weaving in processes, making sure that people are working in teams, and rather than, you know, alone, and constantly checking in and reminding people that they are supported, and that in case they need to take time out, that's really important to us. So we have core team members serving as liaisons to committees so that the the issues, the challenges they have we are privy to them, and we are able to help them as much as possible. Right. And then I will say that one of the things we found helped us a lot in thinking about how weave the, like bring together community members who've been there since 1998, for example, when Greg kicked off software carpentry, and people who joined, say, last year or this year, was for us to define what our values were. And so until 2019, we hadn't articulated them. It was assumed and people had a shared understanding of what was going on and how people worked together, but we hadn't articulated our values yet. And so we prioritized this work, and community members, all the feedback they gave us is what helped us to define this. And now we have core values that we all agree on and that we're able to share with people, that give a better idea of who we are beyond the code of conduct. What are the things that define us? What are the things that make us who we are? How would you describe a Carpentries community member? And these 9 are the ones that community members came up with. I feel that that gives people a better sense of belonging and understanding of what this is, and how as human beings first, they're coming together to do good in a technical setting. Let's talk about challenges. So these are tasks and situations that test a community's abilities to coexist, to collaborate, to develop, and to thrive, I will say. So what are the challenges that the Carpentries has faced? There's a lot more than this, but in the interest of time, and because I'd also love to hear from you or answer some of the questions you have, please feel free to use chat to share your questions. You can start typing them now. I will scroll up and down when I'm ready to start answering them in a bit. So some of the challenges we faced are this, the challenge of time zones, because we're truly a global community. If you remember that map from the beginning, we have community members from New Zealand and Australia and Japan, and then cutting across countries in Europe. And then we have community members in Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan, and then South Africa. And then we've run workshops in Nigeria as well. And then, the States and parts of South America and Canada as well. There was even a workshop in Alaska at some point. And so how do you bring all those people together? How do you make community discussions possible? How do you make a community conference possible? How do you make meetings with a team that's across time zones possible? And then the language barrier, which sometimes has impeded us from getting into new countries. So a lot of the countries that were shaded gray, some of them will need us to have lessons translated, say in Chinese first, before we can start to say, okay, we now want to run a workshop, which might then lead to the growth of a local community that will plug into the global Carpentries community. But for now, we don't have, we need a community to sort of translate the lessons and then help us reach more community members, like in China, for example. And how do you make cross-border collaborations where English is not the native language of different people, but you would like them to have a setting where they can. And then you have a growing community, which means that their needs are evolving. What people needed in 1998 when Greg and friends set up software carpentry isn't what the community needs right now. And how do we recognize these things? Anyway, barriers to entry. So how have we tried to address these community challenges? So barriers to entry. What we try to do is not assume anything. We ask questions a lot, and we let the community tell us where they're at and what their experiences are, what their suggestions are about the way to go forward. So you remember consensus-driven, that we do a lot of work in a consensus-driven environment. So we use our conversations repo a lot for that. And you can scroll through and see all the types of questions we've been asking, right from, feedback about our communications all the way from 2016. We used it extensively again last year. Just yesterday, the question about availability and access to platforms and tools that online communities use, the question about Carpentries values. So we try to, every time we see there's a challenge that pops up, we try and find out if community members have experience and suggestions for how to go about it. We use that information to inform the work of committees that are set up, to then help us have formal recommendations for how to go forward as a Carpentries. Do we move away from a specific platform in favor of another one? Will that be more favorable for all? It definitely involves tough decisions, but consensus-driven decision-making has been a great way that has kept our community going over the years. And then the challenge of time zones. So what we do, we haven't figured this out yet, but what we currently do, and you're welcome to more ideas, for say, if we're talking about a given topic, like say how we use Git, how we teach Git and how we use GitHub in the Carpentries, we will schedule several editions of that same call. So there's one happening at a time that makes sense for people in Europe and Africa, and then there's a time that works for people in, East Coast and maybe West Coast US, and then there'd be a time that works for people in parts of Asia, and then also in Australia and New Zealand and nearby regions. So things like that. So setting up several editions, and where that's not possible, recording the one session that's held so that people can revisit the video, and then having ways for people to give feedback asynchronously after that. And then also, so that we are not a bottleneck as cutting, community members are empowered to lead discussions. We find people to facilitate these discussions who are comfortable with the subject, who are willing to, but also who have led the work in other spaces. Remember, passing on the mic rather than taking it ourselves. And then also encouraging the people talk to each other a lot asynchronously. So have discussions in GitHub issues, go into the mailing list, talk to each other, chat on Twitter in different ways. So interact asynchronously and, normalize that, so to speak. On the right, I've taken a screenshot to show you an example of how sessions at CarpentryCon are. So this was the keynote by the executive director, Carrie Jordan. And if you see towards the bottom of the screen, there's two different times. So one helped people like me, for whom it's almost 2 p.m. right now, to attend. But then the second session was at a good time, really early in the morning for people in New Zealand, and later in the evening for people in the US. So, many people were able to come. And then also the video is embedded for anyone who missed it. So on our YouTube channel, but also in the same slot in our schedule. So anyone who missed it can see it. And then another thing we've done to address the challenge of language as a barrier is our community has been really great about leading translation efforts. The most prominent ones right now, the ones that have extensive work done already, are Spanish translations of our lessons, and they have a standalone GitHub organization, so they have different things translated. And also our lessons in Japanese have been translated by a community in Japan, and they also have a standalone repository. That's what I have taken screenshots of. And then if you check the tag, the internationalization tag, I-18N for other people who prefer to shorten it. A lot of blog posts about how translations have happened, the thought process that has gone into it, the sprint work that has gone into it over the years is elaborated on by our community members. So it's still not perfect. There's many more languages to translate our lessons into. It's something that we are actively chatting about in Slack. We have a translations channel dedicated to this. There's also, I think, 3 or 4 sessions at Carpentries that people have set up to discuss how to, improve our translations for our community, for our lessons, but also other resources. So communications, our blog posts, all the guides that we have. Yeah, so that's something we're actively thinking about, and welcome any ideas that you have to help us. And then the challenge of a growing community with evolving needs, and also that these communities are from different contexts. And so, a strategy that will work in one region will fail and fail miserably in another one. So how do we try to address this challenge? One of the biggest ways that I can tell you about is the Regional Coordinators Program. And what that is, oh, my calendar tells me it's time for me to rest in 10 minutes. That's cool. One of the biggest ways I can think about is the Regional Coordinator Program. So we have community members in different regions who are supported by member organizations. So a member organization will hire someone and then tell the Carpentries, we would like to give 40% of this person's time to Carpentries activities. And what these people, regional coordinators, will do is organize workshops in their regions. So for example, Alexandra, and Yakomo are the regional coordinators for the UK. And Naui Tatara is the regional coordinator for the Nordics and Baltics. And then there's Damien from Australia, there's James and John from Canada, there's Megan from New Zealand, and Angelique, who's the regional consultant for Southern Africa. So they understand the challenges that are in different places, and they're able to guide, local community efforts and the organizing of workshops in these places. For example, when COVID happened, Angelique in Southern Africa, they had already set aside budget to support the, travel and accommodation of people to come to workshops. And when that wasn't possible, they rerouted those funds into buying bundles, so internet for people, so that they could join the online workshops instead. And that has been a really great example of how to, work for the context that you're in. So you can read more about them on the website as well. And then we also developed a resource called carpentryconnect.org, which is meant to empower local communities to set up local meetings and fundraise for them, just so they have guidelines to make it easier, and so that they don't have to wait on us, the core team, to help them, which sometimes takes a long time. So they're able to go right on ahead, and we are able to support, so we don't hold them back. Okay, and I am done with my presentation. So I wanted to say that there's a lot to be done, as you can see in this regional coordinator map. It's the same map with the workshops. Like I said before, the places shaded gray are places where we haven't been able to get to. And as you can see, there's a great need for us to do a lot more across countries in Africa. But I know a lot of it starts with a conversation, and that's important to us too. And so we welcome you to join our community, even as an observer at first, or to share some of the things that you're able to with us. We would really appreciate it. So carpentries.org/community shows all the ways you can be a part of the Carpentries. and all the ways you can join the conversations. But in case you have a question or ideas, you can reach out to me at serah@carpentries.org, and I will point you in the right direction, introduce you to people who are actively involved in those initiatives, or just have a conversation with you. I would love that. Thank you everyone for your time. And if anyone has questions for me, I will read them and answer them best I can. Thank you.